Hey friends, tonight we slip between the scratchy linen sheets of Tudor England to uncover what romance, intimacy, and desire actually looked like in a world without plumbing, privacy, or personal deodorant. Picture a candlelit bedroom if you're lucky, but more likely a shared mattress stuffed with hay, creaking floorboards above you, rats rustling beneath you, and absolutely zero concept of cleanliness. It's dark, it's drafty, and it smells lived in. And that's just the opening act. You see, sex in Tudor times wasn't about love or pleasure, not for most people anyway. It was tangled in shame, superstition, and social control. And if you're imagining some steamy royal drama straight out of a historical romance novel, yeah, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from somewhere interesting tonight, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're waking up in a narrow bed. The straw beneath you itches, and there's a suspiciously damp spot near your ankle. You live in a small, timber-framed house that you share with your parents, siblings, and maybe a goat or two. Privacy? That's for rich people. You don't have a bedroom, you have a room. Still, you're 16, hormones are raging, and there's a girl you pass at the well every morning who makes your chest feel like it's been kicked by a mule. Her name is Alice. She smells like barley flour, and once smiled at you with all her teeth. You're doomed. Now, before you even think about courting her, you need to understand a few things. First, in Tudor England, marriage and sex are tightly bound, and not in the fun way. Marriage is a contract, a sacred one, and sex outside of it is risky business. Not just socially or emotionally, but legally. Premarital sex? That could cost you your standing in the community. Adultery? You could be publicly shamed, flogged, or worse. And yet everyone still does it. You'd think something so dangerous would be better hidden. But Tudor towns were basically built for gossip. Imagine a world where your neighbors don't just know your business. They monitor it like it's their full-time job. Thatched roofs, thin walls, and communal everything meant your private moments were never truly private. Want to sneak a kiss? Behind the alehouse? That old woman selling carrots is already judging you. Whisper sweet nothings after curfew? Someone will rat you out. The church courts actually held presentment days, where townspeople were encouraged to report sexual sins. They called them bawdy courts. Because of course they did. You shift under your itchy blanket, suddenly aware that even thinking about Alice might be frowned upon by the local vicar. But things were even trickier for women. If you were a young girl in Tudor England, your entire future hinged on your reputation. Virginity wasn't just a personal matter, it was a financial asset. Your family's honor, your marriage prospects, even your dowry were all riding on that fragile concept. And the proof? Well, people had methods. Midwives, older women, or even family members might be called upon to inspect a bride-to-be before marriage. Sometimes, brides had to show bloody sheets after the wedding night as evidence of consummation. If that sounds horrifying, it was. And yet, not everyone played by the rules. Here's your first quirky fact of the night: the bundling tradition. In some parts of England, especially rural communities, a courting couple was actually allowed to sleep in the same bed fully clothed, with a wooden board separating them. Think of it as a medieval version of a body pillow that also judged you. It was supposed to let couples bond emotionally without actually bonding, physically. Historians still argue whether bundling was genuinely about modesty or just a convenient loophole. Spoiler, babies happened anyway. Back in your one-room house, someone coughs, loudly. You sigh and get up. The fire's almost out. Your father snores like a bear, and your little brother is having a vivid dream about chasing geese. No romance here tonight. As you light a candle stub and shuffle to the chamber pot, you wonder, how did anyone manage to find privacy? The answer is, very creatively. People met in barns, in kitchens, behind hedges. Some lovers arranged window courtships, whispering through shutters after everyone had gone to bed. One court record even describes a couple caught in a church belfry. It didn't end well. But for those brave or reckless enough to take the plunge, the experience wasn't exactly cinematic. For starters, personal hygiene was not the strong suit of the average Tudor. Most people bathed infrequently, if at all. The idea of daily washing didn't really catch on until centuries later. And without modern toothpaste, deodorant, or toilet paper, well, let's just say the senses were constantly engaged. Some folks did try to improve things. They wore pomander-steiny balls filled with herbs or flowers around their necks to mask the smell. Others dabbed perfume behind the ears. Some believed rosemary kept the body fresh. But unless your name was Queen Elizabeth, chances are your natural musk was doing most of the talking. You snuff out your candle and crawl back into bed, curling up as far from the goat as possible. You think of Alice. You think of bundling boards. And for a moment, you almost wish you lived in a different century. But hey, at least you didn't have to prove anything with bloody sheets. Morning creeps in through the slats of the shuttered window, casting pale light across your straw mattress. It's cold. The kind of cold that settles in your joints and makes your breath visible as you sit up, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The fire in the hearth went out hours ago, and the heavy blanket shared with two of your younger siblings is more scratchy than warm. Someone's elbow is still lodged in your ribs. You ease it out and rise, feet slapping against the dirt floor as you fumble for your hose and tunic. Outside, the town is already stirring. Carts rattle over cobbles slick with mud and manure. A rooster calls out somewhere late, as usual. You splash icy water on your face from the basin near the door, flinch, then sigh. Another day in Tudor England. Another day of rules, chores, and maybe one more chance to see Alice. Alice, with the flour-dusted fingers and the gap-toothed smile. You think about her every time you pass the well, not because she's the only girl your age in the village, though that's partly true, but because there's something about her voice, the way she laughs with her whole body, that makes your chest feel too tight. But you can't just waltz up to her and say that. Not here. Not in this century. Courting in Tudor England isn't just a matter of interest, it's a calculated ritual. One where missteps can mean disgrace, punishment, or worse, being sent to live with your grim Aunt Edith in Norfolk. No one wants that. So you plan your approach like a military campaign. You start by timing your visits to the well. She's usually there after second bell, once the bread's in the oven. You linger nearby, pretending to admire the muddy puddles, or adjust your too short sleeves until she notices you. When she does, it's glorious. A nod, a smirk, maybe even a comment about how the water smells worse today. romantic gold, and that's your cue. You return the smile. You say something witty. You think it's witty about the rats getting too bold. She laughs. Actual laughter. You don't breathe for a full second. This is progress. Now, to keep things proper, you both stay at a safe distance. That's important. Touching is risky, not just socially, but legally. In some towns, being caught holding hands with someone who isn't your spouse could earn you a stint in the stocks. And if someone gets pregnant, that's a scandal of biblical proportions. You've heard tales of entire families being ruined over a single candlelit tryst behind the tavern. So instead, you lean into the customs. Courtship rituals are the backbone of Tudor dating life, especially among commoners like yourself. Bundling, as weird as it sounds, is one of the more well-known practices, two betrothed people sharing a bed fully clothed, often with a board or bolster between them, while family members sleep nearby. Romantic? No. Functional? Technically. But before you get to bundling boards and chaperone sleepovers, you have to navigate the subtler stages. Like compliments. You might praise Alice's embroidery. She stitched a whole goose last week, and the thing even had tiny little feet. Or you could offer a small gift. A ribbon, if you can spare a penny. Or a turnip, if times are lean. In fact, a well-shaped turnip has been known to win hearts, though scholars rarely record these victories. Here's your mainstream historical fact of the night. Among the working class in Tudor England, most people didn't marry for love, but many still found it. Relationships often began through proximity. The boy from the next field, the girl who helped at the mill. People married who they knew, and sometimes they got lucky and liked each other too. But even a simple union was rarely simple. First, there was the issue of parental approval. You might think love is a private matter. In Tudor times? Absolutely not. Your parents had opinions. So did your neighbors. So did the local priest, the baker, and a guy named Bernard who hangs around the market a little too much. Before you could properly walk out with someone, the courtship had to be seen as respectable. That often meant announcing your intentions, either through gifts or gestures, and then waiting. And waiting. And waiting. Meanwhile, you're still dodging the ever-present threat of the church courts. These ecclesiastical courts didn't just care about your soul. They cared about your bedroom, your relationships, and your wedding bands. Did you kiss Alice behind the smithy? Someone saw. Were you alone with her in the herb garden? Your aunt is already reporting it. And once you were suspected of anything untoward, it was difficult to shake, even if nothing had happened. That's the thing about Tudor reputations, they were fragile. For women especially. A single accusation of indecency could ruin a future. And even if proven false, the rumor had already taken root. This leads us to one of the more peculiar fringe tidbits of the era. Love divination. That's right, people. Particularly young women often turn to folk rituals to determine if their crush was the one. One common method involved placing bay leaves under your pillow on Valentine's Eve. If you dreamed of your beloved, it meant they would be your future spouse. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely believed or simply playful traditions. Either way, it shows the emotional investment people placed in love, despite all the rules and risks. Let's imagine you decide to take things up a notch. You craft a small token, perhaps a pressed posy, tied with twine. You rehearse what you'll say. You check your tunic for stains. And then, heart pounding, You approach Alice just after Vespers. She accepts the gift. She says thank you, and for a fleeting second, the world feels like it's opening wide, filled with the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke and something that feels like hope. But don't get too comfortable, because the next step, formal courtship, requires more than just charm. It means navigating financial expectations. Do you have enough to support a household? Can her family spare her labor at home? Will your combined wages feed future mouths? You start counting pennies. Literally. You figure out how many chickens you need to sell to afford a wedding. You ask your uncle if he'll lend you a bit of wool to trade. You even briefly consider joining the local militia just for the signing bonus. And all of this just for the chance to build a life together. That night, lying awake beneath your worn blanket, you think about what comes next. A shared home, perhaps. A small plot of land. Children with muddy feet and gap-toothed smiles. The dream is simple, but in Tudor England, it's anything but easy. Still, you close your eyes and smile in the dark. Because earlier today, Alice had turned back once after you said goodbye. And sometimes, that's enough. A week has passed since Alice smiled at you again. Really smiled. Not the polite sort you give a neighbor or a priest, but the kind that makes your stomach drop and your ears burn. That moment has replayed in your mind 100 times since. And now, here you are again, rising with the clink of church bells in the distance, fumbling through the icy air for your tunic and hose, wondering if you'll see her again today. You've started walking past the bakery more often, maybe too often. Once in the morning, then again near dusk. You act like you're interested in the price of oatcakes, but everyone knows you're not here for bread. You're here for Alice, and half the town knows it. But love or anything that resembles it is complicated in Tudor England, not just because of your parents, not just because of gossip, but because of the one constant power that hovers over everyone's shoulder like a nosy ant with a really big Bible, the church. And oh, the church has thoughts on your feelings. To be clear, you're not a heathen. You go to church regularly, sit through the sermons even when they drag on about sins you're sure you haven't committed yet, and you say your prayers before bed. You've memorized the commandments and try your best not to sin before breakfast. But lately, it's getting harder, because when you think about Alice, her freckled cheeks, the sound of her laugh, the way her apron's always slightly crooked, you start to feel things. And according to your local priest, those things are dangerous. Lust is like a spark, he says, and if you let it burn, it'll scorch your soul. Still, there's a difference between feeling and acting. And so far, all you've done is smile at her, maybe one brush of her sleeve in the market that nearly gave you a heart attack. Yet, even that is enough to leave you lying awake at night, wrestling with your thoughts and your conscience. Here's your mainstream historical fact of the night. The Tudor Church Catholic early on, and later Protestant after Henry VIII's Reformation, viewed sex as necessary but deeply suspect. It was supposed to happen only within marriage, and even then, you were encouraged to treat it as a duty, not a pleasure. If it felt good, you were probably doing it wrong. Some priests even suggested you should pray before and after the act, just to be safe. Romantic, right? There were so many rules. Forbidden days included Sundays, feast days, fast days, days before communion, and basically any time that didn't feel morally neutral. The idea was to keep desire on a very short leash. Marriage didn't erase temptation, it just made it manageable. But temptation wasn't just a man's problem. Women, too, were scrutinized and warned. They were expected to be modest, quiet, and chaste. If a woman laughed too loud, wore her bodice too low, or met a boy's eyes for a second too long, it might be enough to ruin her reputation. People would whisper. Some might even shout. And yet, desire found a way. Even in this heavy atmosphere, couples met. They whispered sweet nothings behind hedgerows, exchanged flowers in passing, carved initials into tree bark. They stole moments, because that's all the world allowed. And when those moments became too much to bear, some couples turned to an unofficial Tudor practice, hand fasting. Hand fasting was, essentially, a spoken marriage vow. If two people declared themselves married in front of witnesses, or even just to each other, with intent to wed it could be seen as legally binding. No priest, no paperwork, just a verbal contract and the hope that no one would challenge it. Historians still argue whether hand fasting was officially recognized by the church or merely tolerated. Some claim it was a holdover from older pagan traditions. Others see it as a practical solution for poor couples who couldn't afford a full wedding. Either way, it gave young lovers a loophole in a world full of locked doors. But back in your world, you're not ready for that yet. You and Alice are still exchanging cautious smiles and awkward conversations about sheep shearing and weather patterns. You haven't even asked her directly how she feels. You're too scared she'll laugh or worse, tell someone. Still, the feelings are real and growing. Which brings us to one of the stranger Tudor superstitions, love magic. Yes, people really believed you could cast spells to make someone fall in love with you. Some involved herbs basil for fidelity, thyme for courage. Others required more intense methods. One charm involved baking a piece of your fingernail into a cake and feeding it to your crush. Effective? Who knows? Unsanitary? Definitely. One particularly odd method involved writing the name of your beloved on parchment, tucking it into your shoe, and walking backward 3 times around a churchyard at midnight. If you dreamed of them that night, they were meant to be yours. If not, well, time to try the fingernail cake. Of course, not everyone believed in these charms, but in a world with limited privacy and even more limited personal freedom, people turned to what they could. Superstition, folklore, and half-remembered rituals offered a kind of control and illusion of agency in a life mostly dictated by others. And right now, as you haul water and avoid eye contact with Alice's mother, you could use a little agency. You're thinking seriously now. Could you really marry her someday? You have no land, no savings. You still owe your uncle 3 chickens from last harvest. But you do have 2 strong arms and a reputation for honesty, and in Tudor England, that's not nothing. So you start saving. Not money. Exactly. You don't have much but favors. You help old John with firewood, knowing hell speak well of you to the elders. You offer to fetch ale for the reeve, hoping hell mention your name when jobs come up. You're building something, even if no one else sees it yet. And then, one morning, Alice walks past you in the lane. She doesn't say anything, just gives you that smile again, the one that knocks the wind out of you. And just like that, you're back to square one, completely tongue-tied, wildly hopeful, and wondering how anyone ever manages to survive love in this world. Because Tudor England may be full of plagues, taxes, and nosy clergy, but even here, amid the rules, and the fear, and the endless mud, something as fragile and absurd as love still manages to bloom. You just have to find the courage to chase it. You wake up with a start not because of any danger, but because of the cold. Your blanket is thin, the fire has long gone out, and there's a strange draft whispering through the thatch above your head. It's still dark, though the horizon is beginning to blush. Roosters haven't crowed yet. Even the rats seem to be sleeping in. Your muscles ache from yesterday's labor hauling water, chopping firewood, and fixing the same broken fence post your neighbor's pig keeps demolishing. But none of that matters, because today is the fair. The midsummer fair only comes once a year, and in a world that doesn't offer much excitement outside of church sermons and leaky ceilings, that means everything. You dress in your cleanest shirt, meaning the one without lye stains, and dust off your boots with a patch of linen. You even borrow your uncle's cap, which is slightly too big, but makes you look vaguely respectable. You're not the only one making an effort. As you walk into the village, you see garlands strung between houses. Children run barefoot across the muddy lanes, already sticky with jam. Women have gathered near the well, with baskets of pies and rolls. The air smells like cinnamon, sweat, and roasted onions, surprisingly pleasant given the era. But let's be honest. You're not here for the food. You're here for Alice. You've been thinking about her every day since she accepted your wooden heart token. Since the smile. Since the walk. Every glance she gives you is like the sun breaking through cloud. Every time she turns away, it's like being dunked in a frozen river. At the fair, everything feels a little looser. Shirts, tongues, morals. Music plays from a trio of fiddlers with sore fingers and hopeful hats. There are games of strength, haphazard wrestling matches, and a sheep-chasing contest that ends with a near disaster in the pie stall. You spot Alice near the seamstress tent, holding a ribbon up to the light, her eyes catching the sun in a way that makes your knees buckle slightly. You cross the green like a knight going to war, except instead of a sword, you have a handful of barley sugar. Not impressive, but it's the thought that counts. She accepts it with a laugh, and for the first time, you two are alone-ish. Surrounded by people, yes, but wrapped in your own little bubble of nervous banter and shared cider. You even manage to ask her to dance. She says yes. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Courtship at Tudor fairs wasn't just recreation, it was a community-sanctioned opportunity for couples to interact. There were traditions designed specifically for it. Certain dances involved touching hands. Some games paired boys and girls at random in ways that were suspiciously predictable. Even the church relaxed a bit during fair days. If you were ever going to steal a glance or brush a hand, this was the time. Of course, physical affection still came with risks. Public displays of too much fondness could lead to gossip, or worse, being dragged before the church court for lechery. And church courts were no joke. They could impose fines, demand public confessions, or even recommend penance that involved walking barefoot across town while reciting prayers. But that's not on your mind now. You're thinking about how Alice's hand fits into yours as you stumble through the steps of a clumsy jig. You're trying not to step on her toes or trip over your own. She's laughing at you, probably, but it's the kind of laughter that makes your ears burn in a good way. Later, you sneak away from the crowd to sit near the edge of the woods. The music still faint in the background. The sun is setting, painting the sky with gold and ash. You talk about silly things, goats, pies, the neighbor's cat who acts like it owns the churchyard. But then the conversation turns quieter. You ask her what she wants. She hesitates, says she wants a home, maybe some chickens, a place where she doesn't have to worry all the time. She wants warmth, safety, a little joy. And then she asks you the same. Your answer surprises even you. You say you want someone to share your bread with, someone who won't mind that your feet smell after a long day, or that you sometimes snore like a stuck piglet, someone who laughs at your jokes, even when they're bad. You both sit in silence after that, listening to the wind move through the trees. And in that silence, something soft settles between you. Not quite a promise, not yet, but something close. Let's pause here for a quirky tidbit. In rural parts of Tudor England, some couples performed bed pledging, a practice where they would publicly commit to one another by placing a symbolic object, like a glove or a piece of cloth, on a shared bed in front of witnesses. It wasn't legally binding in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the village, it carried weight, sort of like a folk engagement. Historians still argue whether this was encouraged by the church or merely tolerated as a harmless country custom. Some evidence suggests priests would later insist on a proper church wedding, especially if the couple became too familiar. Others claim bed pledging was a critical step toward full betrothal. Back in your world, you and Alice aren't quite there, but you're inching closer. You walk her home under a canopy of stars. Neither of you talks much, just the crunch of boots on gravel, the occasional rustle of a nightbird in the hedges. When you reach her door, she lingers for a moment. Then, without a word, she hands you the ribbon she bought earlier, pale green, smooth as wind. She presses it into your palm and closes your fingers around it. Then she slips inside. You stand there for a while, holding that ribbon like it's the most precious thing in the world. Because maybe it is. You don't even bother pretending to sleep that night. The walls are thin. Every cough, creak, and drip from the roof sounds like it's happening inside your own skull. And worse, the voices. Your mother and uncle whispering in the next room, assuming you're asleep. You're not even close. She's a sweet girl, your mother murmurs. But he can't marry on good intentions. He barely earns enough to feed himself. And her father, your uncle says, pausing to stoke the fire. He's already sniffing around, asking who taught him to go sniffing around his daughter. Your cheeks burn. You curl tighter under your blanket and squeeze your eyes shut. Welcome to the Tudor version of romance, where love is a group project, whether you like it or not. By morning, the tension is thick enough to butter bread. You mumble through breakfast, dodge questions about your plans, and escape to the orchard just to breathe. There, the cool air and chirping birds almost make you forget how cornered you feel. Almost. You find Alice later by the stream, her skirts hiked up slightly as she washes laundry against a rock. The image would be peaceful, almost romantic if her face weren't so clouded. You sit beside her in silence, then ask the only question that matters. What do we do now? She glances at you, and for the first time, you see doubt. Not about you, necessarily, but about everything else. Her family, the whispers, the terrifying weight of doing something, anything, against the grain of what's expected. Because here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, love rarely led the way. Marriages were arranged with practical goals in mind: joining property, securing family alliances, consolidating dowries. Even among commoners, marrying for affection was considered a luxury, not a right. And yet, it happened. quietly, bravely, sometimes disastrously. Alice tells you she's heard her father is already considering another suitor, someone from the next village, a boy with sheep. You, as of this morning, still have 0 sheep. I don't want to be bartered, she says, her voice tight, like a sack of flour. You know what she means. People say it all the time. Marriage is a contract, a joining of households. But nobody talks about the people inside the contract, their nerves, their dreams, their fear of cold beds and colder partners. You reach for her hand. She doesn't pull away. Now comes a crucial moment one historians call troth plighting. That's your quirky tidbit for the night. It was the act of making a verbal promise to marry, often before any priest was involved. 2 people could declare their intent in front of witnesses, and in many communities, that was enough to be considered betrothed. Not quite married, but not quite single either. A dangerous gray area. And here's where it gets fun. Historians still argue whether a troth plight was legally binding or not. Some say, yes, if consummated afterward, it could be enforced in court. Others argue it depended entirely on the region, the timing, and whether anyone important was watching. You and Alice? You don't have a priest, or a notary, or even a particularly helpful goat. But you have each other, sitting by the stream, hands linked and hearts pounding. You promise her that you'll do whatever it takes, that you'll find work, that you'll face her father, that no matter how messy or hard or humiliating it gets, you're not going anywhere. She squeezes your hand, hard. You think that might count as a yes, but don't get too comfortable. Because right about now, the church steps in. You see, in Tudor England, the church was more than a place for Sunday sermons. It was the moral watchdog of the entire community, and one of its favorite pastimes, investigating cases of fornication, bastardy, and unclean living. The local bishop's court handled these matters with all the subtlety of a marching band. If someone reports you, and someone will, you could be summoned to explain yourselves. You might be fined, forced to do public penance. In some cases, if things have already gone too far, the court might demand a rushed marriage to cover the scandal. Which sounds romantic until you realize it's usually done in shame, not celebration. Sure enough, 2 days later, your name appears, posted on a notice board outside the chapel. You and Alice have been called to appear. Not because anyone caught you doing anything, but because people are talking like they did. And in this world, rumors are often treated like proof. Alice is pale when she sees the parchment. Her father storms away from it in silence. Your mother weeps into her apron. The trial isn't formal, not like in modern courts. It's more like standing in a cold room while 3 elders and a priest ask invasive questions about where you were, what time you walked her home, and how long you stood outside the gate afterward. You try to answer with dignity. Alice does too. But the looks on the faces around you say that dignity isn't going to save you. Eventually, the priest sighs and tells you both what needs to happen. A declaration of intent. Before witnesses. Something solid. You agree. Not because you're ashamed, but because you're tired. Tired of ducking looks. Tired of pretending your love is something dirty, something stolen. So a few days later, in front of both families, you stand in the churchyard and say the words, "I pledge to take Alice as my wife." And she says, "I pledge to take you." There's no feast, no fireworks, just a nod from the priest, a reluctant grunt from her father, and a few claps from your little cousin, who clearly has no idea what's going on. But in your chest, a fire lights, because for the first time, something feels official. Yours. As the crowd disperses, Alice slips her hand into yours. No one stops her. You walk home together, side by side, ribbon tucked safely in your pocket, hearts beating loud enough to drown out the gossip. It's not a wedding. Not yet. But it's something. And for now, that's everything. The days blur after that. You wake early, work late, and collapse into bed each night with dirt under your nails and dreams full of wedding bells that feel too far off to be real. You're no longer just trying to stay afloat. You're trying to build a raft strong enough for two. The talk in the village quiets a bit, not because people suddenly mind their business, but because you've done the one thing that shuts mouths faster than anything else in Tudor England, made your intentions clear, publicly. The priests nod. The vows in the churchyard, those were signals that you're not playing around. But as any Tudor couple would tell you, intent means nothing without a dowry. And here's your mainstream historical fact. Most marriages, even among peasants, required some sort of economic exchange. That could mean a dowry from the bride's family linens, livestock, maybe a patch of landor, a marriage portion from the groom, showing he could support a household. No matter how in love you were, nobody wanted a union built on nothing but daydreams and blisters. Alice's family, of course, has expectations. They want a promise you can feed her, clothe her, house her somewhere other than your uncle's attic. Her father wants details, numbers. He doesn't care about your feelings. He wants to know how many bushels of barley you can harvest per acre. So, you go to work. Real work. You beg the miller for extra hours, even when it means hauling grain until your back seizes up. You chop wood for half the village, stitch fences, carry slop for pigs that eye you like they know something you don't. You're sore in places you didn't even know had muscles. But every time you feel like giving up, you pull that green ribbon out of your pocket and squeeze it until your hand hurts. You're not doing this just to prove something to her father. You're doing it because you want to build something real. Alice, for her part, is no idle observer. She's working too harder than anyone. She's baking for the parson's wife, helping tend the neighbor's twins, even mending boots for the local shepherd who lost 3 toes to frostbite but still insists on walking barefoot. She brings home scraps, hoards coin like a dragon, and keeps a running tally in a scrap of parchment she hides beneath a loose floorboard. It's not romantic, but it's love. You meet at twilight, when the work is done and the sky bleeds lavender. You sit on the old stone wall outside the village and compare calluses. Some nights, you're too tired to talk. So you just sit together, heads leaning close, hearts beating slow. And that's when she tells you her secret plan. She wants to build a dowry, not just rely on her father's reluctant generosity, but create something of her own, something that gives her say in her future. She's been trading favors, bartering, even spinning extra yarn to sell at the next market. She wants you two to have choices. That's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In some Tudor communities, women could and did contribute their own dowries, especially when their families were poor or reluctant. Spinners, midwives, brewers, many of them set aside small amounts over years, slowly earning autonomy. It wasn't common, and it wasn't always enough to sway a father's will. But it happened. Quietly, steadily. Power, 1 penny at a time. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or limited to unusual circumstances. Some believe it was mostly symbolic, a gesture of independence. Others suggest it was more practical than we give it credit for, evidence of women's hidden agency in a deeply patriarchal world. Alice doesn't need a historian to tell her what's possible. She just does it. But even with all this effort, your aching body, her clever schemes, the reality still looms large. Marriage costs money. There's the bedding, the food, the priest, and yes, even the ale. You could always skip the feast, but that would invite fresh gossip, more proof you're poor, unprepared, or worse, ashamed. So, you start planning the simplest wedding imaginable. No musicians, just your cousin with a battered lute. No feast, maybe a pot of stew and some bread. Alice wants a wreath of fresh herbs, not flowers. You sketch a plan together in the dirt with sticks, like generals preparing for battle. Then the rains come. For 2 weeks, the village drowns. The roads turn to rivers. The mill shuts down. Your firewood rots. Everything smells like mildew and disappointment. You can't work. Alice can't sell. Your coin stash dwindles to almost nothing. You try not to panic. But on the worst day, the one where the roof leaks and your bread goes moldy, you find yourself kneeling behind the barn, forehead pressed to the earth, whispering a prayer to no one in particular. And in that moment of quiet desperation, someone taps your shoulder. It's old Marlowe. It starts with a glance of side-eye from the baker's wife as you help Alice load a bag of flour into her arms. Then a murmur from 2 old men on a bench when she offers to pay for half the purchase herself. They're subtle at first, these signs. Just little looks. A pause in conversation. A too long silence after a comment. But slowly, you begin to feel it. The shift in the air. The sensation that you and Alice have stepped slightly outside the line. Not far. Just enough for people to notice. You brush it off at first. After all, you're doing everything right. Working hard. Planning the wedding. Saving coin. You've made your intentions public. The priest gave his nod. You've even started gathering things for the home you'll share. A stool here, a chipped bowl there. You and Alice walk the footpaths every evening, trading ideas like they're secrets. But still, the whispers keep coming. She speaks too much for a bride. He defers to her far too easily. She's clever. Someone says, never a compliment in that tone. And suddenly, all the small things that made your relationship work, your easy give and take, your shared decisions, your evening debates over whether the bed should face the hearth or the window, become things to be suspicious of. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tudor marriages operated within a strict patriarchal framework. The man ruled the household. His wife was expected to obey, cheerfully, silently, and with unflinching loyalty. This wasn't just social custom, it was encoded into sermons, law, and even medical belief. A proper wife was submissive. A good husband was firm, just, and occasionally harsh if necessary. Alice, of course, is none of those things. She's thoughtful, outspoken, quick-witted. She can recite half the Psalms by heart and has opinions on sheep grazing patterns. She isn't rude, just unafraid. You've always admired that. But others? Not so much. The tipping point comes one afternoon during wedding prep. You're at the blacksmith's, negotiating the cost of an iron cooking pot. You hesitate over the price, unsure if you should push harder, when Alice gently steps in and offers a different deal, one involving a trade of goods, a small payment in coin, and a promise to mend the blacksmith's wife's cloak. It's brilliant, efficient, respectful. But the blacksmith's eyebrows shoot up, like you just handed him a fish and called it a horse. She speaks for you now, he says, half joking. You laugh it off. So does Alice. But the comment lingers. Later that week, the village reeve stops you after church. A friendly word, he says. Just advice. People notice things, he tells you. Especially when roles get blurred. You nod politely. Then spend the next hour wondering what exactly he meant. The pressure builds quietly, like a kettle that never quite boils. You and Alice begin second-guessing yourselves. Should you let her talk to the tanner alone? Should you insist on choosing the linens, even though you can tell flax from sheep wool? These aren't real problems, not between you, but they begin to feel real, simply because others act like they should be. One night, under the stars, you ask her if she regrets any of it, being so public, being so involved. She looks at you, mouth full of bread, and says, I regret not taking 2 loaves from the baker. He gave me a look today. You laugh. But her smile fades quickly. People expect us to be miserable, she says, to fall into line, to fight, to fail. You know she's right, but that doesn't make it easier. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of Tudor England, newlyweds who were seen as too unconventional, too happy, too equal, too different might be subjected to a tradition called skimmington riding. Villagers would parade through the streets, banging pots, mocking the couple, sometimes even hoisting effigies of the pair on a cart. It was meant to shame them into conformity, or at least entertain the neighbors. Historians still argue whether this practice was about enforcing gender norms, policing sexuality, or simply providing a cathartic outlet for social frustration. But whatever the case, the message was clear. Stand out too much, and you'll pay the price. You and Alice haven't been paraded yet. But one afternoon, you overhear a group of children singing a new rhyme. It ends with your names and the word henpecked. It stings. Not because it's true, but because it isn't tanned yet, somehow. They still believe it is. You feel the urge to pull away, to correct course, to remind the world that you are the man, the leader, the decision maker. But then Alice does something that changes everything. She hands you a bundle one morning, wrapped in old cloth. Inside, a handmade shirt. Rough, but carefully stitched. Embroidered at the sleeve with your initials and a small green ribbon knotted into the hem. I thought you might want to wear it for the ceremony, she says. You hold it up, speechless. She adds, it's not much, but it's ours. In that moment, the noise falls away. The whispers, the sideways glances, the expectations, none of it matters. Because what you have isn't rebellion, it's resilience. You're not trying to make a statement. You're just trying to make a life. One where you build together. And so you press forward. Together, you finish the final wedding arrangements. You settle on a location, the chapel yard, near the old elm tree. Alice arranges for a few friends to help with food. You secure a jug of cider. Not much, but enough to feel like a celebration. And one night, just before the big day, you sit beneath the stars again. This time, quieter, more certain. The village hasn't changed. Not really. But you have. Not louder, just stronger. And in that strength, there's peace. Because you know whatever comes next, you'll face it hand in hand. Morning light slices through the thatch slats of your roof like a slow, golden knife. The village is already murmuring, awake roosters crowing with misplaced confidence, someone shouting at a stubborn goat, and the distant clatter of a dropped pail echoing down the lane. But today, feels different. Not because the sounds are unusual, but because your heart is pacing like a drum even before your feet hit the floor. It's the day before the wedding. Not the ceremony, that's tomorrow, but the moment everything really begins. The final errands, the quiet goodbyes, the ritual of shifting from just you to you and Alice. It's not dramatic. No parade, no official rehearsal. But in your chest, it feels like something monumental is uncoiling. You gather your things, the shirt she made, your best pair of hose, still a little patched, and a rough bit of ribbon she handed you to tie your hair. You've got 2 coins left and a long list of tasks, starting with fetching the priest's supper. Apparently, officiating love requires well-fed wisdom. The village is unusually lively for such an ordinary morning. Neighbors nod with faint smiles, or at least fewer frowns than usual. One gives you a carrot. Another slaps your back so hard your lungs nearly exit your ears. You feel like a walking announcement. And yes, the gossip still flickers. Someone mutters something about your odd little courtship. But today, you don't care. You're buoyed by a strange sort of electricity. Not pride, not fear. Just a quiet certainty that no matter how threadbare your cloak or how clumsy your dancing, tomorrow you won't be alone. You pass the baker's stall, and to your surprise, he shoves a bundle of still warm bread into your hands. "Congratulations," he says, not making eye contact. You smile anyway, because this is Tudor generosity. Awkward, begrudging, and genuine in its own way. As you make your rounds, you hear small details about weddings past. One woman swears her cousin got married during a thunderstorm and still has blessed children. Another insists you must bury a coin in the threshold of your new home before entering it together, or else risk infertility and frequent boils. You take it all in with a nod and a smirk. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tudor wedding customs were an eclectic mix of Christian ritual, pagan tradition, and village-specific superstition. While the church controlled the official marriage process, banns, vows, priestly blessings, local communities often added their own rituals. These could include symbolic foods, lucky charms, or household rites believed to protect the new union. And that brings you to Alice. She's been just as busy. You find her in her mother's cottage, surrounded by women all chattering, sewing, plaiting herbs, and arguing about which sprig should go into the ceremonial bouquet. Alice catches your eye from across the room and gives a barely noticeable wink, like she's drowning in lavender and lace, and only you can save her. You linger, but eventually excuse yourself. It's tradition, after all. Bride and groom shouldn't spend the night before the wedding together, at least not under the same roof. So, you stay at your uncle's house that night. His son snores like a bear with sinus issues, and the hay mattress creaks like it's auditioning for a ghost story. But somehow, you still sleep. Sort of. Dreams come in flickers. Alice's face. A candle flickering at the altar. A loaf of bread falling apart mid-blessing. You blame the baker. You wake well before dawn, heart thudding in time with your thoughts. And that's when you see it. The shoes, set neatly by the door. Not your own. Brand new. Not luxurious, but clean. Polished. Tied with a red thread. There's no note. Just a nod from your uncle as he stirs porridge. "Someone dropped those off," he mutters. Didn't say who. You pick them up, heart full. This is how the village loves. Silently, anonymously, with just enough deniability to avoid vulnerability. You put them on. They fit. That afternoon, the priest pulls you aside. Nothing dramatic, Just a few words of caution. The usual reminders about duty, fidelity, and making sure you don't forget the Lord in your marriage bed. He winks at the last part. It's awkward. You nod like you understand everything, even though your mind is a cloud of nerves and wool. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Some priests in Tudor England actually gave bedroom advice before marriage, sometimes even in writing. These guides, though cloaked in pious language, offered strangely specific directions from how long to wait before consummating the marriage. Some said 3 nights, to which positions were least sinful. One even warned couples to avoid intimacy on Sundays or during fasting seasons, or risk inviting demons to the pillow. Historians still argue whether this advice was widely followed or mostly symbolic. Some believe these church guidelines helped anxious couples feel prepared. Others suggest it simply reinforced clerical control over even the most private corners of life. Either way, the priest seems satisfied with his little sermon. He pats your shoulder and says, "You'll do fine. Just keep her warm, keep her fed, and don't forget to laugh." Good advice, really. You spend the last daylight hours helping set up the space by the elm tree. There's no tent, just a cloth draped over 2 poles, a few mismatched benches, and the promise of sun if the weather holds. A young boy runs by with a basket of onions. You have no idea why. The moment feels still, like a breath held too long. And just before sunset, Alice walks past with her arms full of linens, her hair half tamed by twine. She glances at you just once, and in that glance, the whole world softens. No music plays, no trumpets sound, but in your chest, something shifts. This is happening. It's not perfect. It's not polished, but it's real. Tomorrow, you get married. And whether the wind howls or the bread crumbles, whether someone sings lewd rhymes or a chicken gets loose in the middle of your vows, it won't matter. Because after everything, you'll have each other. The morning breaks slow and soft, like someone gently pulling a wool blanket from your shoulders. Pale sunlight creeps through the cracks in the shutters, catching bits of dust dancing in the air. For a second, you just lie there, letting the quiet sink in. The muffled sounds of a waking village hum beyond the walls, footsteps on damp earth, chickens protesting breakfast, and a dog barking at absolutely nothing. It's a normal day. But you're about to do something entirely abnormal. You're getting married. You swing your legs off the straw mattress and immediately step on a cold patch of floor. A sign from the universe? Probably not. But you still wince like it's fate. Your uncle, who hosted you for the night because tradition insists that you and Alice sleep apart, grunts from his corner as he stirs a pot of something vaguely edible. "You ready?" he mutters. You nod. But the truth is, are you ever really ready? You dress in silence. Every layer feels heavier than usual. The shirt Alice embroidered for you, its tiny green stitch tucked at the sleeve, goes on last. You smooth it down, brush off imaginary dust, then pause. There's something sacred in how you look today. Not fancy, not noble, just prepared, honest. Outside, the sun has risen higher, painting the village in that warm, forgiving light that makes even the ugliest chicken coop look a little poetic. You make your way down the path toward the old elm tree by the chapel yard. That's where the ceremony will be held, because you're not rich enough for a church wedding and not poor enough to be completely ignored. Right in that sweet spot where tradition meets availability. When you arrive, the setup is humble but earnest. A canopy of worn cloth is stretched between two poles. A few crooked benches form a semicircle around the spot where the priest will stand. Someone strung a garland of dried rosemary across the top, nod to good fortune, or at least pleasant-smelling breath. Alice isn't here yet. That's expected. You take a deep breath and try not to wrinkle your shirt by fidgeting. Villagers start to trickle in. Some carry bundles of food. Others bring musical instruments, simple ones, like flutes and drums, the kind that can be played whether you're sober or not. Children dart between legs, giggling, already sticky with honey. And then she arrives. Alice steps into the clearing like the wind brought her in. She wears a pale blue dress that's clearly borrowed but mended with love. A sprig of thyme is tucked behind one ear. Her hair is braided down her back in a pattern that must have taken all morning. She's not wearing shoes, just a ribbon around each ankle. It's not regal. It's not elaborate. It's perfect. Your stomach flips. She sees you and gives a crooked smile, like she knows exactly how overwhelmed you are and is trying not to laugh about it. And then, before you can even process the sight of her, the ceremony begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, most marriages took place outside the church, literally on the church steps or in the chapel yard. The focus was less about divine theatrics and more about public witness. Once vows were exchanged before others, and a priest blessed the union, the couple was considered married even if the bed had yet to be warmed. The priest begins with a few stilted words, quoting scripture and reminding everyone that marriage is both holy and practical. There's no poetry in his voice, but his hands tremble just slightly when he blesses your joined palms. Your hands fit together naturally, like they've been practicing in secret this whole time. I take thee, you say it. So does she. And just like that, the deed is done. There's no kiss. That would be a bit much. But your eyes do linger a moment longer than proper, and you catch her whispering something under her breath that might be finally. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of rural Tudor England, after the ceremony, it was traditional for the villagers to escort the newlyweds to their home while banging pots and pans a noisy parade called a charivari. It was both a celebration and a cheeky reminder of what the night ahead entailed. In some cases, neighbors would even block the door until the groom offered a bride price in ale or coin to be let through. Luckily for you, no one here is that bold, though your cousin does rattle a spoon against a jug until someone elbows him into silence. After the formalities, the feast begins. It's more potluck than banquet. Bread, stewed peas, dried apples, a suspiciously greasy pie. A single roast chicken makes a dramatic appearance, only to be stripped to bones in under 3 minutes. Someone shares a jug of cider so strong it could polish boots. It gets passed around like communion. The music starts softly. A fiddle, a pipe, a shaky tambourine, and then the dancing begins. Children first, spinning like maypole ribbons. Then the old folks, arms linked, steps precise. Finally, the young crowd awkward, stomping, laughing. You don't dance at first. You're too busy watching Alice. She moves like she's balancing between worlds free, yet grounded. Joyful, yet focused. When she finally walks over and pulls you by the hand, there's no refusing her. You dance badly. She dances worse. You both laugh so hard that cider nearly comes out your nose. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Tudor weddings were primarily religious events or social contracts. The church emphasized the sacramental nature of marriage, but for most villagers, weddings were more about family alliances, land, labor, and community acknowledgement. Love wasn't irrelevant, just wasn't central. But right now, watching Alice fix her fallen braid and chuckle at something your uncle mutters, you think love might be the most relevant thing in the world. The sun begins to dip. The shadows grow longer. People start to leave, some offering handshakes, others quick hugs, a few just nodding on their way past. Someone leaves a pie wrapped in cloth on a bench. A gift, probably, or a warning. Finally, it's just the two of you. Sitting beneath the elm tree, watching the last sliver of sunlight disappear behind the hills. You turn to her and say, "So what now?" She looks at you, deadpan. "We pray the house doesn't fall down." You laugh. Because honestly, that's fair. And as the wind picks up and the last note of the fiddle fades, you feel it again, that deep, full stillness. It's not a beginning or an end. It's a pause. The calm right before you open the door to your new life. Together. The walk back to your new home doesn't feel like part of a ceremony anymore. The canopy's been taken down. The musicians have packed up. The leftover food is already being scavenged by dogs and opportunistic chickens. The sun has sunk low enough that shadows stretch like sleepy cats across the fields. And now, it's just the two of you, newly married, quietly tired, slightly buzzed on warm cider walking side by side down the well-worn path toward the rest of your life. Your shoes are slung over your shoulder because they started to bite halfway through the dancing. Alice walks barefoot too, her hem trailing through the dust, a sprig of thyme still clinging to her braid. You don't say much. And that silence isn't awkward. It's comfortable, like sitting next to a fireplace where no one needs to talk to feel warm. Your house now, together waits ahead, a squat little thing with smoke curling from the chimney and a roof that droops just slightly to the left. The thatch always leaks in spring, but tonight it looks like a cottage straight from a bedtime story. Not fancy, but enough. Before you step inside, you pause. Not out of nerves, just to mark the moment. You're about to cross a threshold, not just of a house, but of identity. You're not just you anymore. You're someone's husband. Alice is someone's wife. And together, you're a household, a unit, a future. She looks at you. You look at her. She raises one eyebrow. If you hesitate any longer, the bread's going to get cold. You laugh. Wouldn't want to insult the bread. And with that, the two of you step inside. The warmth hits you first, thick and fragrant, with wood smoke and something surprisingly pleasant, like lavender and onion. Someone's cleaned. The floor's been swept, the bed made with fresh straw, and a jug of cider sits on the table with a scrap of ribbon tied around the neck. There's bread too still warm from a neighbor's oven. Probably the baker's wife. She's got a soft spot for young couples and a strict policy about never returning her baskets. There's even a note. No screaming. Walls are thin. You both snort. It's the kind of joke only villagers get away with, half teasing, half well-intentioned. Everyone knows what tonight's supposed to mean. You glance at the bed in the corner. It looks smaller than you remember. More fragile, too, like the kind of bed that would protest loudly if you rolled over too quickly. You sit on it gently, and it lets out a creak so dramatic it could come from a church organ. I give it 2 weeks, Alice says, eyeing the frame. 3 days, you counter, if we're careful. She shrugs. so we won't be. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, most newlyweds didn't get a wedding night that looked anything like a modern honeymoon. No candlelit rooms or long baths. Often, the couple had to share their first night with family nearby, or even sleeping in the same room. Privacy was a rare thing, and many homes were single-room cottages. If you were lucky, you might get a curtain around the bed. If not, you got bold neighbors and thin walls. You, at least, have one room to yourselves. You settle into a rhythm. Alice lays out the bread, slices it carefully with the small knife from her apron pocket. You pour cider into two mismatched mugs. It's not a feast, but it's something, and more importantly, it's yours. You both eat quietly, savoring the crusty edges and the cider's bite. Every once in a while, you catch each other's eyes and smile without knowing why. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was a belief in parts of Tudor England that eating an egg together on the wedding night would ensure fertility. The yolk symbolized life, the shell, the womb. Some couples would crack an egg into a shared bowl, stir it, and drink it raw together while reciting a rhyme. Others would bury the eggshell under the threshold to protect against bad spirits. You don't have an egg. You do have bread. So you tear it in half, hand her a piece, and say, to not poisoning each other. She raises her slice in mock solemnity. May we never burn the stew. Clink. A toast of crusty crumbs. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue over how much actual love played a role in Tudor marriages. Some insist that affection grew only after the wedding, while others point to folk songs and diary entries that suggest plenty of starry-eyed romances. There are stories of couples eloping, running away from arranged matches, or defying social expectations to marry for feeling rather than convenience. You and Alice, well, you had some say in this. But it wasn't exactly the stuff of sonnets either. Still, as she leans back in her chair, stretches, and lets out a groan that sounds like it's been stored in her bones for years, you can't help but think, this might work. Not just work, but thrive. Once the bread is gone and the last drops of cider are claimed, you both tidy up the small table. There's not much to do. Just stack the plates, cover the jug, bank the fire. But every gesture feels oddly meaningful, like you're laying bricks for the next chapter. Then comes the moment you've both been pretending not to think about. The bed. The candle flickers low. The air has cooled. You pull off your shirt. She unties her braid. No fanfare. No dramatic music. Just two people in a very creaky bed, pretending they're not holding their breath. You pull the blanket over your legs, careful not to tug too hard. She slides in beside you, her arm brushing yours. The straw beneath shifts and rustles, trying to find a shape that doesn't poke someone in the ribs. You exhale. She exhales. Silence. Then creak. You both burst out laughing. Loud, ridiculous, uncontrolled laughter. The kind that shakes your chest and makes your eyes water. It goes on so long that the fire actually flickers harder in protest. And that's when you know you'll be okay. Because if you can laugh like this on a straw bed, in a crooked cottage, with burnt bread breath and a jug of questionable cider, then you can probably survive anything. Even pigs. Even storms. Even in-laws. Alice rolls onto her side and murmurs, "You're warm, so are you. Good." And then she's asleep. Just like that. Out cold, like a baby squirrel curled in a mitten. You stare at the ceiling for a moment, letting your heartbeat slow, letting your thoughts settle. letting the rhythm of her breath sync with yours. Outside, a dog barks once, then goes quiet. The wind picks up slightly, rattling the shutter, and the village sleeps. But you're exactly where you're meant to be, in this house, with her, on this creaky, barely holding it together bed, wrapped in something that might just be, if you're lucky, the rest of your life. Morning in your new home doesn't arrive gently, it barges in. The rooster crows right outside the wall, as if it's been assigned by fate to remind you that marital bliss doesn't exempt anyone from chores. You blink your eyes open, still half tangled in straw and blankets, and try to piece together whether last night was a dream or a badly timed village festival. Alice groans beside you and pulls the blanket over her head. You can't blame her. Sleep last night came eventually, but not without effort, what with the creaky bed frame, the occasional draft blowing across your feet, and the unfamiliar feeling of not being alone in your bed anymore. You sit up slowly, mindful of the fact that the mattress beneath you has shifted entirely to the left. At least 3 straw stalks are poking your thigh through the sheet. You wince and swing your feet over the edge, landing on a cold floor that makes you hiss through your teeth. Welcome to married life. There's bread on the table stale, but still edible. And the cider jug has maybe 1 gulp left in it, which you offer to Alice when she finally sits up, hair wild and eyes barely open. No, she says flatly, waving it away. You earned that. You gulp it down and immediately regret it. Morning cider is a choice you won't make again. Then comes the realization. You are responsible now, not just for yourself, but for each other. You're no longer someone's child under someone else's roof. This tiny cottage is yours to run, yours to protect, and unfortunately, yours to clean. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tudor couples were expected to settle quickly into their domestic roles. Men handled the physical labor farming, repairs, heavy hauling. Women managed the household economy, cooked, preserved food, kept the fire burning, spun cloth, and raised children. It wasn't so much a matter of choice as it was survival. Every task, no matter how small, contributed to keeping starvation and illness at bay. You start the day by checking the thatch above your heads. One of the rafters seems suspiciously bowed, likely from the storm a few weeks back. You make a mental note to fix it before the next rain, or risk waking up with a soggy pillow. Meanwhile, Alice is already at the hearth, poking embers back to life with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgery. Neither of you really talks for a while. There's comfort in the rhythm of movement, cracking open the window shutters, folding the bedding, sweeping the floor with a broom that looks like it's been used since Henry VII. At one point, you step outside to grab firewood and realize that the entire village seems to be watching your cottage. Or maybe it's just the old ladies near the well who stop talking when you pass by. You smile, nod. Pretend you don't hear their muffled giggles. Here's your quirky tidbit. In many Tudor villages, there was an unofficial tradition of inspecting a newlywed's morning demeanor to gauge the success of the previous night. A cheerful bride was taken as a good omen. A grumpy groom raised eyebrows. Some even checked for signs like a recently swept doorstep or leftover food being discarded, evidence that the household was settling well. You go back inside and sweep the doorstep out of sheer paranoia. Alice raises an eyebrow. Afraid the old women will hex us? Afraid they'll gossip, you reply. Too late, she says, smirking. You begin sorting the lentils. That's not a euphemism. You're literally separating good lentils from the bad. Alice's mother brought over a sack of them yesterday, muttering something about stocking up while you can. You sit at the table, picking through them, while Alice mashes dried peas for lunch. The silence stretches, but it's not awkward. In fact, it's weirdly cozy. She breaks it. Do you think you'll still like me when my teeth fall out? You look up. Depends. Will you still cook? She squints. Probably. Then yeah. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether early modern marriages were driven more by affection or necessity. Diaries from the time sometimes reveal tenderness, even humor between spouses. Other records like court complaints and wills show practical, even cold, alliances. It's hard to gauge emotional intimacy when letters are censored and public behavior is shaped by community expectations. What you do know is that Alice just made the ugliest mashed peas you've ever seen, and you plan on eating them anyway. As midday approaches, the small cottage heats up. The fire does its job too well, and you crack the window wider. The smells of the village drift in: baking bread, animal sweat, someone boiling cabbage too long. All of it is familiar. All of it says, "You're home." You eat lunch sitting on the doorstep, sharing a hunk of bread dipped in those lumpy peas. A dog you don't recognize wanders by and stares at you like it's owed something. You toss it a crust, and it accepts, tail thumping once before trotting off. Name it? Alice asks. You shrug. Freeloader. She nods approvingly. You spend the afternoon attempting a very loose version of a schedule. You fetch water. She organizes what few supplies you have. You attempt to fix the shutter that keeps banging in the wind. She mends a tear in the blanket with thread so thin, you're not sure it's doing anything. Everything feels improvised, like actors stumbling through a play with no script. But it works. At one point, a neighbor boy stops by to drop off eggs and nearly trips over a cat you don't own. He mutters something about your mother sent these and bolts before you can say thanks. You look at the eggs, then at Alice. Eggshell under the threshold? She grins. Only if it's lucky. That night, as the light fades again and the stars return, you both sit in front of the fire and eat the last of the bread with a smear of cheese that might be older than your marriage. The day has been long. Your legs ache, your back complains, but you don't regret a thing. The cottage groans again. The fire pops. You lean your head back and sigh. Alice, curled beside you with her feet on your lap, says softly, "We're doing okay, right?" You nod. We haven't burned the place down. Yet. And we only argued about the broom once. That's practically a miracle. You squeeze her ankle gently. Yeah, we're doing okay. You blow out the candle. The darkness wraps around you again. And this time, it feels like home. The next few days blur together in a way that only new beginnings can. Each one brings the same sunrise, the same list of chores, and the same clumsy attempts at building a rhythm with another person. But even so, no 2 days feel quite the same. You begin to notice the tiny rituals forming between you and Alice. She always hums the same off-key melody when she starts the fire. You tend to stretch your back the same way before lifting the water bucket. She leaves her shoes by the door always, with one facing the wrong direction, and you always fix it, even though you don't know why. It's like two lives are beginning to braid into each other, thread by thread. On the fourth morning, You're woken not by the rooster, but by shouting outside your window. You jolt upright, heart pounding, and pull the shutter aside just in time to see old Hugh chasing his pigs again. One's gotten loose, and two others seem to be following it just for fun. Alice groans from the bed. That man needs a fence, or a miracle. You smile, then lay back and listen to the soft crackle of the hearth and the rhythmic clatter of someone 2 doors down splitting firewood. Morning in the village has a particular sound to it, somewhere between a lullaby and a battle hymn. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor villages, daily life was heavily structured by the natural rhythm of light and weather. Most people rose with the sun and worked until dusk. Tasks were seasonal planting in spring, harvesting in fall, mending in winter. Leisure was rare, often tied to religious holidays, which were eagerly awaited as brief pauses in a cycle of constant toil. This morning, however, brings a different kind of challenge. Alice's mother stops by. She doesn't knock. She walks in like she still owns the place and immediately starts inspecting things. "The thatch needs patching," she mutters. "And you're storing your salt too close to the fire. That'll spoil quick." You nod and smile and try not to look like you're dying inside. Alice handles it with the grace of someone who's been through this before. She offers tethers none. She offers bread it's stale. She offers the last bit of cheese, and her mother takes it without saying thank you. After she leaves, you collapse against the wall. "That went well," you say. "She only criticized 6 things," Alice replies. "That's a record." You learn quickly that married life in Tudor England isn't private, not even a little bit. Neighbors visit unannounced. Relatives drop by to check on things. You're expected to attend gatherings, to make appearances at church, to participate in market days, and to help others raise barns or shear sheep, whether you like it or not. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tudor villagers believed that idleness invited sin. That's why many communities enforced laws against loitering or excessive rest. A man seen sitting for too long during daylight could be labeled shiftless, a term that was both a social insult and a moral accusation. Women were expected to be just as industrious, if not more so, because they juggled both housework and communal responsibilities. You and Alice try to stay ahead of that judgment. You take up a few repairs around the house, a squeaky door hinge, a cracked stool leg. She begins mending some borrowed linens, her fingers deft even if her stitches are stubbornly uneven. On the 5th day, something unexpected happens. The priest visits. This time, he does knock. You answer, a bit too quickly, wiping your hands on your shirt and hoping you don't smell like sheep dung. He offers you a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes and steps in, looking around as if inspecting for sin or dust. He speaks in slow, measured tones. "Just checking in on our new household. The community is invested in your success." You nod. Alice offers him tea still none. He declines, thankfully. Then he gets to the real reason he came. He sits down at your table and folds his hands. "There are questions," he says, "from certain members of the congregation about whether your marriage has been properly sealed." You blink. "We've had the ceremony." He nods. "Indeed. But, you understand? Until the marriage is consummated, the bond is not complete in the eyes of the church." Alice walks in behind him with a loaf of bread, and you see her shoulders tense. "There have been no complaints," she says calmly. No, of course not," he replies, a bit too quickly. "But tradition holds that there should be evidence. A sign, perhaps. The sheet, or a witness." You almost choke. A witness? You sputter. He smiles. Not literal. Just assurance. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Tudor consummation rituals, like displaying blood-stained sheets, were practiced widely or just among nobility. Some records suggest peasants were left alone unless a dispute arose. Others claim even the poorest couples felt community pressure to prove the validity of their union. The truth likely varied by region and wealth. You and Alice do not provide any proof. The priest seems disappointed, but doesn't press further. He leaves shortly after, pausing only to remind you about Sunday Mass and to mention that idleness breeds temptation. You shut the door behind him with more force than necessary. Alice sets down the bread, sighs, and says, "Should we shown him the creaky bed?" That's all the evidence he needs. You laugh harder than you should. That night, the two of you eat dinner in quiet defiance, not of the priest himself, but of the endless expectations that seem to swirl around marriage like gnats in summer. As if love is something to be measured by rituals and rules. But the truth is simpler. You reach for her hand across the table. She meets your gaze and holds it. This right here is what marriage looks like. Even if the church doesn't approve of the way your spoons don't match, even if your windows don't face east, even if your salt is too close to the fire, it's in the shared meals. The smothered laughter, the gentle way she wraps a cloth around your hand after you burn it trying to fix the lamp. You go to bed that night, feeling tired but rooted, not in the sense of being stuck, but in the sense of belonging. And as the fire dims and the last log crackles into coal, you pull the blanket up to your chin and listen to the rhythm of her breath beside you. It's not perfection. It's not a storybook, but it's yours. The sixth morning in your new life arrives wrapped in cold mist and the unmistakable stench of soaked earth. It's raining again, and not the romantic kind you'd read about in some brooding Tudor poem, but the kind that soaks you to the bone before you've even stepped outside. You wake up to the persistent patter of water hitting the thatched roof above your head, and worse, a slow drip that lands with cruel precision on your left ear. You roll away from the leak and grumble. "I'll fix it today, I swear." That makes 3 days in a row you've said that now. Alice mumbles something unintelligible from under the blanket, probably agreeing or calling you a liar. Hard to tell. There's no real sleeping in on a rainy Tudor morning. Not when chores pile up whether the sun shines or not. So you crawl out from under the bedding and swing your feet onto the chilly dirt floor. The hearth is low, just warm enough to keep the air from turning your breath into fog. Alice pokes at the embers with a sleepy sort of resentment, while you grab your boots still wet from yesterday and force them on anyway. Your first task? Visit the village healer. Not because you're ill. At least, not in the conventional sense. But someone, probably Alice's mother, has kindly suggested that you both go see Mistress Beth, the herbalist and all-purpose health expert, to ensure things are progressing naturally. Translation: the village wants to know if babies are imminent. So off you go, hood pulled low and shoulders hunched against the wind. The path to Mistress Bethy's cottage is a muddy slip and slide lined with gnarled hedgerows and puddles deep enough to hide a small dog. You slip twice before you reach her door, arriving thoroughly damp and slightly out of breath. She opens the door before you even knock, eyes narrowed. "You're early." "I'm cold," you reply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her home smells like dried thyme and boiled onions. Herbs dangle from every beam, and the shelves overflow with strange jars, some labeled in Latin, others marked with things like stomach brew or birthing aid. A small black cat weaves between your ankles as you take a seat on a wobbly stool by the fire. She stirs something in a pot, never looking at you, and says, "You look pale. It's raining. And your appetite? Depends on the food. Sleep?" You shrug. "When the roof's not leaking, pretty decent." She finally glances at you, eyes like polished stone. You're here for her then. You nod, not quite sure how to answer. There's pressure. Mistress Beth snorts. There's always pressure. Give her this. She reaches for a pouch tied with red thread and hands it over. Brew once daily. Boil it. Don't steep it. And don't add ale, no matter what old Marga tells you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tudor women often relied on female healers for reproductive advice and general health. While male physicians existed, they were rare in rural areas and expensive. Instead, village women turned to herbalists who passed knowledge down through generations. Remedies often included common herbs like rue, sage, pennyroyal, and mugwortsome, of which modern medicine now confirms had real biological effects. You hand over 2 eggs and a hunk of cheese as payment, then trudge back home through thicker mud than before. Alice is sitting near the hearth when you return, darning a sock with the focus of a general plotting battle. You hand her the pouch. What's this? Rain-flavored tea, with side effects. She sniffs it and makes a face. Smells like something the goats wouldn't eat. Then it must be working. She laughs and sets it aside. You both know she'll drink it anyway, not because she believes in its magic, but because not drinking it would start rumors faster than you could say infertile. After lunch, onion soup and toasted barley, you climb up to the roof, determined to fix the leak once and for all. This time, you bring actual materials, a bucket of patching clay, some extra reeds, and a prayer that gravity will be kind. It isn't. You nearly slide off the edge twice and hit your thumb so hard it swells up like a boiled plum. But by the end of the afternoon, the leak is plugged, and your dignity mostly intact. Back inside, Alice is sweeping, and for once the floor actually stays clean for more than 3 seconds. You tell her the roof is good now. She raises an eyebrow. For how long? You smirk. Until next Tuesday, probably. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Some Tudor households place charms inside their thatched roofs to ward off misfortune bundles of herbs, carved tokens, or even dried animal hearts. It was believed that storms weren't just weather, but spiritual omens, and a leaky roof might invite more than mildew. Might open your home to bad luck or wandering spirits. Alice doesn't believe in that sort of thing, but she still slips a dried lavender bundle behind the hearthstone when she thinks you're not looking. That evening, the rain finally breaks. You and Alice take the chance to walk to the common pasture just to stretch your legs and breathe something other than hearth smoke. The fields are a sponge beneath your feet, but the air is fresh, and for a moment, everything feels still. A few other couples are out too, arms linked, boots squelching. You exchange polite nods, nothing more. But it feels like joining a quiet, shared fraternity of people figuring out this strange thing called marriage. Nobody talks about love. They talk about firewood and leaks and how many chickens survived the fox last week. But in all of it, there's a kind of affection that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. On the walk home, Alice stops and plucks a violet blooming stubbornly beside a stone. She tucks it into her hair and says, "You didn't say I look nice today." "I didn't know I was allowed to say that," you joke. She bumps you with her shoulder. "You're my husband. You're allowed." Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how much genuine romance existed in common Tudor marriages. While many were arranged or based on necessity, there's growing evidence, from personal letters and courtship poems, that affection and humor were very real parts of ordinary love. But the public expression of that love was shaped by community, faith, and social roles, leaving modern scholars to guess how couples truly felt in private. You feel pretty confident you know how this couple feels. That night, Alice steeps the parsley potion, sips it, and winces. Still tastes like dirt. You hand her a crust of bread to chase it down, and she rewards you with a kiss on the cheek. The fire crackles low. The roof holds. And for the first time all week, you don't fall asleep to the sound of dripping water. Instead, you listen to her soft breathing, the distant call of an owl, and the quiet hum of a world that just for a little while feels manageable. You're not rich. You're not powerful. But you've got each other, a mostly working roof, and a decent chance at tomorrow, which, in Tudor England, is practically a luxury. The next morning arrives with a brightness you almost don't recognize. Sunlight, actual sunlight, slips between the wooden shutters and dances across the packed dirt floor. For a few blissful moments, you lie there with your eyes half open, letting the warmth spill across your face. There's no sound of rain, no draft sneaking in through a warped window, and miracle of miracles, no drip landing on your forehead. Alice is already up, tending to the fire. She's humming something tuneless, but comforting, and it mixes with the sizzle of water heating for the morning wash. You sit up, stretch, and groan. She glances over. "Still sore?" "Only where I exist." Your muscles ache from brewing and wood chopping, but you're not complaining. Not really. You feel more capable lately. Not stronger, necessarily, but more rooted. Like the tasks don't change, but somehow you have. You rinse your face with warm water and take your time getting dressed. It's market day, and the sun has drawn everyone out. The whole village seems brighter, louder, alive in a way it hasn't been in weeks. Outside, neighbors are already setting up stalls along the green. Chickens cluck nervously in woven baskets. Bright scarves flap from laundry lines strung between cottages. Someone's selling boiled sweets, and the smell is enough to make you pause and smile like a child. Alice is already there when you arrive, chatting with Marga, the baker, and bartering for extra rye flour. You spot her smile before she sees you, and for a second, you just stand back and watch. She's lighter lately, quicker to laugh. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the fact that your roof is no longer threatening structural collapse. Or maybe it's that the two of you are finally finding your rhythm. You join her, just as she's haggling over a cracked jug. Marga gives you a nod that might be approval. Your wife drives a hard bargain. "She's had practice," you reply, and Alice elbows you lightly. You spend the morning picking through root vegetables, eyeing a suspiciously cheap wheel of cheese, and avoiding Hugh, who still insists your last batch of ale was too clean. He says it like an insult. Back home, you unload your goods and realize you're almost out of candles. The evenings have been longer lately, and the tallow tapers you've been using are down to sad little nubs. So, in the afternoon, you decide to make more. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor households, making candles was a regular necessity. Most commoners couldn't afford beeswax, which was reserved for churches and the wealthy. Instead, they used tallow-rendered animal fat, which was smelly, greasy, and smoky, but cheap and effective. The process was messy, time-consuming, and required a strong stomach, especially when the fat had turned. You collect the scraps from your previous tapers and a block of fresh tallow from the butcher, who gives you a look that says, "You sure you know what you're doing?" You're not. But you nod anyway. You set up a rough rack from an old broom handle, string the wicks, and heat the tallow in a blackened pot over the fire. The smell hits first rancid and clingy, the kind that finds its way into your clothes, your hair, your soul. Alice retreats to the other room and shouts through the door, "You better not burn the house down." You dip the wicks one by one, letting each layer cool before dipping again. It's tedious and meditative in a gross, smelly sort of way. By the end of the day, you've got a dozen lumpy, uneven candles that look like they were made by someone under duress. Which, to be fair, they were. Alice reemerges, inspects them, and says, "They're charming." You try not to beam with pride. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Tudor households believed that a candle, which flickered wildly or sputtered while burning, was a sign of approaching spirits or a bad omen. People would sometimes whisper to their candles or trace protective symbols in the wax to keep misfortune at bay. You light one that evening, and immediately it sputters, crackles, and threatens to go out. Alice looks at you. "We're haunted now." You blow it out and say, "Not on my watch." After dinner pea porridge and a bit of salted fish, you sit by the hearth and talk. Not the heavy kind of talk, but the kind that drifts. She asks what kind of home you would build if you had a dozen more trees and a team of very obedient oxen. You joke that you'd build a tower just to get above the mud. She asks what your favorite meal was as a child, and you say, "Anything that didn't smell like feet." She laughs so hard she nearly spills her tea. And for the first time in a while, you don't feel the need to do anything. Not fix, not patch, not plan. Just be. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how much leisure time commoners in Tudor England actually had. Some evidence suggests that rural life allowed for seasonal rhythms bursts of work, followed by relative lulls. Others argue that survival demanded constant labor, leaving little space for true rest. Likely, it depended on your luck, your land, and whether your roof was leaking that week. You lean toward the first view tonight. Later, you head outside to check on the firewood pile and stop in your tracks. The sky is clear. Not just clearer than yesterday, but brilliant. Stars blanket the heavens like spilled salt across black velvet. You haven't seen it this bright in months. No smoke, no clouds, just cold air, crickets, and a dizzying canopy overhead. Alice joins you a moment later, arms crossed over her chest. "I forgot it could look like this," she says. "Me too." You stand together for a long time, watching in silence. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. A breeze rustles the treetops. And in that moment, no mud, no chores, no pot of rancid fat boiling over. You feel something rare. Peace. You know it won't last. Tomorrow someone's chicken will escape, or a beam will creak, or Marga will say something sharp behind your back. But tonight, you earned this. The stars don't care if your ale was too clean or your candles are crooked. They shine just the same. You head back inside. The fire is low. The bed is warm. And the candle blessedly burns steady this time. You let the darkness settle. And you sleep. You wake to the unmistakable sound of chickens screaming. You jolt upright, hit your head on the low ceiling beam, and scramble toward the door barefoot, still tangled in your linen shift. Outside, chaos. Feathers flying, villagers shouting, and right there in the center of it, a lone very smug-looking fox trotting off with someone's best hen in its mouth. Alice peers over your shoulder, blinking sleep from her eyes. I told Hugh to fix the latch on that coop. You mutter something unkind about Hugh, throw on your boots, and join the group already forming at the edge of the green. Turns out, it's not just one fox. It's 3. They've been prowling the outskirts of the village for weeks, and now they've struck in broad daylight. Farmers are furious, children are crying, and someone has already started planning a trap involving bacon, a bell, and what looks suspiciously like a bear trap. You glance at Alice. We don't even have chickens. She shrugs. We're about to. Because here's the thing, after that market visit, you and Alice decided to take a step toward full grown-up married couple status. You bought 2 hens. Hens with names. Hens you were planning to keep in a small, tidy coop you'd build next to the cottage this week. Now you're realizing you're going to need a lot more wire, a stronger latch, and possibly a night guard with a spear. Back home, you spend the morning hammering together the coop using salvaged planks, bent nails, and colorful language. Alice paints a crooked sign that reads, Egg Depository. You hang it proudly. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, keeping a few chickens was common practice even among the poorest families. Eggs were a precious source of protein, and hens could be bartered or given as rent payments. Many tenants were even obligated to provide poultry to their landlords on religious feast days. Once your coop is fox-proofed, or at least fox-resistant, you and Alice walk to a nearby farm where an older couple is looking to rehome a few hens. Their daughter just married and took half the flock with her. The couple gives you a deal. 2 hens, 1 extra, if you promise to bring back eggs. The birds are scraggly, suspicious, and oddly judgmental, but you fall in love anyway. You carry them home in a basket, the way some people carry flowers. You spend the afternoon introducing them to their new enclosure. Alice names them after queens: Bess, Mary, and Anne. Anne is already glaring at you like she might stage a coup. By sunset, you have 3 hens settling into straw, a reinforced coop, and the very real possibility of having your own eggs in a few days. It feels domestic, almost sweet. You sit on the stoop, rubbing the last of the splinters from your palm, while Alice hums nearby, braiding garlic to hang by the window. You remember the early days, muddy boots, leaking ceilings, burned porridge, and think, you've come a long way. But of course, peace doesn't last. That evening, there's a knock at your door. It's the bailiff. He's not angry. That's the worst part. He's smiling. And that smile means taxes, or tithes, or something else that's going to cost you at least one of your 3 hens. I won't stay long, he says cheerfully, stepping inside without asking. Just taking record of married couples for the parish register. The new vicar wants everything tidy. You grit your teeth and nod. Alice offers him ale, and he accepts with a suspiciously well-practiced thank you. He produces a scroll and begins asking questions in the most cheerful tone possible. Name, date of marriage, Occupation? Husbandman. You say automatically. Any children? He asks. There's a pause. No, Alice says quietly. Not yet. He scribbles something. Then, as if it's nothing, he adds, And your marriage debt is paid regularly, I trust? You blink. Alice stiffens. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. In Tudor England, the phrase marriage debt referred to the religious and social expectation that married couples would sleep together regularly. The church considered it a marital duty. Refusing your spouse without reason could even be brought to ecclesiastical court. Yes, your bedroom could become someone else's business. You stammer something like, yes, of course, and try not to imagine a council of old men tallying your performance. Alice offers a strained smile. Would you like another cup of ale? The bailiff declines, finishes his notes, and leaves you both standing in stunned silence. Alice finally says, if he asks again, I'm telling him the hens are witnesses. You both burst into exhausted laughter. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how strictly Tudor authorities enforced the so-called marriage debt. Some claim it was rarely acted upon unless tied to larger scandals or property disputes. Others argue it played a real role in controlling private life, especially for women, and gave institutions power in the most personal aspects of marriage. Either way, you and Alice spend the rest of the evening sipping the last of your cider, watching the hens peck at shadows, and pretending there are no bailiffs or taxes or traps waiting tomorrow. The candle flickers low. Anne squawks in her sleep. And for the first time in a long time, your home feels, dare you think it's settled. Not perfect, but yours. This morning, you wake with sore hands and ash beneath your nails, but there's a quiet pride warming your chest. You stretch, listen to the slow creak of the rafters above, and realize nothing is leaking, nothing's on fire, and for once, your toes aren't freezing. That patch chimney? Still holding. That door latch? Still latching. The hens? Still alive. Still judgy. You sit up and watch Alice snoozing peacefully beneath the wool blanket, her hair a riot of curls tangled against the pillow. You don't dare wake her. She deserves the rest. You tiptoe across the room, stepping over a pile of firewood she stacked yesterday, and pull on your boots. It's cold, but not bone-deep cold. Just the kind that wakes you up. Outside, the air smells of damp leaves and chimney smoke. You squint toward the eastern tree line. The sun hasn't broken the horizon yet, but the sky is shifting from black to blue. You decide to make something of the day, and by make something, you mean you're going to triage into brew beer. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. Beer was the drink of choice in Tudor England, even for children. Water was considered dangerous, often polluted from livestock runoff, tannery waste, or just general filth. So ale, weak as it might have been, was safer. Every household knew how to brew a basic batch, and alewives, often women, played a central role in village life. You gather the barley Alice traded for and carry it to the back shed you've unofficially dubbed the brewery. It's not much, just a wooden lean-to with a cauldron and a warped bench, but it gets the job done. Mostly. You begin by grinding the barley. The hand quern is slow, unforgiving, and definitely built by someone who hated wrists. You turn and turn and turn until your arms ache and the barley resembles coarse grit. Then you boil water over the fire, add the grain, and stir in a rhythm that feels part science, part science. Alice appears just as you're stirring in the herbs yarrow for bitterness, since you still can't get your hands on hops. She wrinkles her nose. It smells like sweaty bread. You grin. Perfect. That's how you know it's working. She perches on a stool and begins mending a tear in your only winter cloak, humming under her breath while the steam rises between you. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many Tudor brewers tested fermentation by watching for bubbles, or get this dipping a small wooden stool into the ale and sitting on it bare-bottomed. If it stuck, it meant the brew had body. You and Alice agree, silently, that you will never try this method. The mixture simmers for hours. You strain it into barrels lined with cloth and leave it near the hearth to ferment. In a few days, it'll be ready or it'll explode. Either way, exciting. With the brewing done, you turn your attention to the woodpile. Winter is whispering at the edges of the season, and you're woefully unprepared. You grab the axe, flex your sore fingers, and begin splitting logs. Each crack of the blade echoes into the trees. The rhythm is steady, satisfying until you glance up and see a pair of eyes watching you from the edge of the woods. It's not a fox, not a wolf, just a child. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a tunic too thin for the weather and no shoes. He doesn't speak, just stares. You lower the axe slowly. Are you lost? No answer. Alice hears your voice and comes outside, wiping her hands on her apron. When she sees the boy, her face softens instantly. She kneels down and coaxes him toward the house with a gentle tone you've never heard before. Within minutes, he's wrapped in a spare cloak and sipping warm broth from a chipped bowl. He doesn't say much, but he eats like someone who hasn't had a full meal in days. Eventually, he mumbles something. Mother's sick. I went to find food. That's all he says. Alice gives you a look. Long, quiet look, and you already know what she's thinking. You grab your boots. The boy leads you through the trees, across a shallow stream, and up a mossy hill, where an abandoned cottage leans like it's given up. Inside, a woman lies curled on a straw mat, coughing weakly, her skin pale and clammy. You help her sit up, offer water, and press your hand to her forehead. Burning. Alice joins you moments later with herbs, garlic, and a poultice she's crushed into a linen wrap. She doesn't waste time. She tucks the woman in with extra blankets, leaves a few loaves of bread, and whispers something soothing as she smooths the woman's hair. You make a plan. The boy will stay with you for now. You'll check on the mother daily. The village may be cold and judgmental, but no one gets left behind. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how consistent Tudor-era communities were in caring for their poor and sick. Some records suggest close-knit villages supported each other through hardship. Others point to neglect, exile, and fear of illness. The truth probably lived in the middle. Some helped. Others turned away. Back home, the boy curls up in your bed without a word and is snoring within minutes. You and Alice share a blanket on the floor. Has got your appetite, she whispers. You chuckle, then fall silent, listening to the fire crackle. Outside, the wind shifts. The cold is coming. You can feel it in your bones. But tonight, you've got warmth, bread, and 3 hens still pecking contentedly beneath the window. You've got a new batch of ale, hopefully not cursed. You've got a child asleep in your bed, and a woman on the hill who might yet recover. And you've got each other. That, you think, will have to be enough. By now, the days are shrinking fast. You wake before the sun, and it still feels like midnight. The edges of the cottage windows are laced with frost, feathering out like little icy ferns. When you exhale, you can see your breath swirling in the air right there in your own home. The fires burn down to coals. You drag yourself from bed, teeth chattering, and reach for the bundle of kindling you left near the hearth the night before. Tom is still curled up on the bed, buried beneath every blanket you own. Has got his knees tucked up like a snail and one socked foot sticking out. The sock, of course, is Alice's handiwork. One side reaches mid-thigh. The other is barely clinging to his heel. But he loves them. Wears them like armor. You manage to coax the fire back to life, and soon a bit of warmth returns to the room. Alice joins you, bleary-eyed, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. "You're up early," she mumbles, setting down a pot of water. You nod. Didn't feel like sleeping in a meat locker. She chuckles softly, rubbing her hands together. Wait until January. You try not to think about January. Today is one of those chop wood or freeze kind of days. You spend the morning splitting logs, stacking them carefully, counting each piece like a banker counting coins. You don't have nearly enough, but you pretend you do, because the alternative is too heavy to carry. Tom helps by dragging branches. He's small but determined. He makes up for muscle with stubbornness. Occasionally, he tosses one on the pile with a dramatic like he's felling a tree single-handedly. When you break for lunch, you sit together by the hearth with a bowl of barley porridge that Alice's managed to make taste vaguely of onions and victory. There's a little bit of dried pork crumbled in, and it's like a holiday feast. Tom shovels it down with both hands, eyes bright. It's hot. Alice smiles. That means it's working. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Porridge, whether of oats, barley, or peas, was the foundation of most Tudor meals for common folk. It was cheap, filling, and endlessly variable, depending on what you could forage, grow, or beg from neighbors. Cold porridge was often fried into cakes, or thinned into soup the next day. Waste nothing, that's the rule. In the afternoon, you take a walk to check on Tom's mother. The forest path is slick with frost, and the puddles crunch underfoot. You carry a basket bread, garlic paste, a slice of last night's seed cake. When you reach the cottage, she's sitting up, her hair tied back, and she's got color in her cheeks again. Her voice is still rough, but she manages a small smile. "I feel like someone sat a pig on my chest," she rasps. "That means you're improving," you say, offering her the bread. She accepts it with shaking hands. Alice checks her pulse, her eyes, her cough. It's not gone, but it's better. Slowly, the woman will heal, and when she does, maybe she and Tom can return to their little cottage, or maybe she'll want to stay. You don't ask. Not yet. You spend the walk back in thoughtful silence. The wind has picked up, carrying the dry smell of cold earth and chimney smoke. There's something in it, a reminder that winter isn't knocking. It's already slipped through the cracks. Back at home, the three of you prepare for another long night. You hang blankets over the door. You tuck straw under the windows. You rub the waxy stubs of your last few candles, willing them to last another week. Alice is stitching again, this time patching your cloak with fabric from an old apron. The result looks like it was attacked by a checkerboard, but it'll hold. Tom is trying to teach himself how to play a reed pipe he found in a basket of junk near the hearth. It makes sounds like a goose being stepped on. Alice grits her teeth. "That's lovely, dear. You cough into your cup." Here's your quirky tidbit. Musical instruments were common even in poorer Tudor homes. Simple ones, like the pipe, tabor drum, or even spoonser, used to pass time during long winters. Singing together wasn't just entertainment, it was comfort. Some songs warned of plague, others were love ballads, but most were just a way to feel less alone. Later that evening, after Tom is asleep and Alice is curled up with a basket of mending, you go outside to check the roof. It's become a habit. You stare up at the dark sky, stars cutting through the frost-hazed air. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. An owl hoots back. And then quiet. Stillness. You pull your patch cloak tighter around your shoulders and close your eyes for a moment, letting the cold bite your nose and cheeks. It reminds you you're alive. Back inside, Alice has set your boots near the fire. She hands you a bowl of broth, thin but warm, and sits beside you. You both stare into the flames for a long while. "I think Tom's starting to feel safe," she says quietly. You nod. Hez smiling more. She pauses. "Maybe we needed him too." And just like that, you realize it's true. The boy who showed up with frostbitten toes and a hollow stare now feels like part of your home, part of your survival, maybe even part of your future. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue just how family was defined in Tudor England. Was it strictly blood relations? Or did necessity forge bonds stronger than kinship? Some records show informal adoptions and blended households were common among the poor. Others argue the church and state tightly regulated who could be considered family. But for you, tonight, it feels simple. Those who share the fire are family enough. Tom stirs in his sleep, mutters something about seed cake, and rolls over. You and Alice laugh softly. The wind taps against the walls like it's testing your defenses. You blow out the last candle, let the dark settle, and feel the warmth of the hearth against your skin. Tomorrow will come, with its endless chores and cold and splinters and smoke. But for now, you've got warmth and company and just enough hope to make it through another night. And maybe, just maybe that's everything. You're awakened by a knock at the door. Not the wind scratching across the thatch. Not a curious hen tapping on the wall outside. This is deliberate, sharp, not panicked but not gentle either. You sit up slowly. The fire's gone down to embers, painting the walls in soft, sleepy red. Tom stirs under his blanket. Alice is already on her feet, cloak around her shoulders, lantern in hand. You grab the iron poker just in case and crack open the door. There she stands. A girl, maybe 15, maybe younger, barefoot in the frost, clutching a bundle wrapped in threadbare cloth. Her face is blotchy with cold, but her eyes are clear. "Please," she says, voice low. "They took my brother. You step aside." She enters cautiously, blinking at the warmth. Alice reaches for the bundle. It's a baby, maybe 3 months old. Eyes closed, lips slightly parted, wrapped in more holes than fabric. Tom peers from behind the hearth, silent. Alice ushers the girl to a stool near the fire. She sits without protest, hands gripping her knees. You pour her a cup of broth, warm and thin, and press it into her hands. She drinks, fast, then slower. When she finally speaks, her voice is a whisper. "My name's Bess. My brother's name is Will." She tells you their story. Their parents died of fever last spring. Since then, it's been just the two of them and now the baby. She doesn't say who the father is. You don't ask. Will was caught stealing from the stewards, gardened 3 turnips, and a handful of greens. Not enough to feed them a day, let alone a week. The steward's men, dragged him off in the morning, said he'd be held until market day. And market day is still 2 nights away. You look at Alice. Her lips are tight. Where did they take him? Bess doesn't hesitate. The grain barn. They lock it up at night. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, even minor theft could be met with harsh consequences. Jails were scarce in rural areas, so makeshift detention-locked barns, disused root cellars, or even pits in the ground was often used to hold accused thieves until the bailiff or local constable decided their fate. Punishments were uneven and depended heavily on the whims of whoever was in charge. You give Bess a warm cloth for her hands and tuck the baby into the bed next to Tom. Tom doesn't say anything, just scoots over and makes room, pulling the blanket up to cover the baby's tiny toes. Alice kneels beside the girl. You're safe here tonight. Rest. But sleep isn't coming easy. Not for Bess. Not for you. Later, you step outside to think. The air bites your nose. The stars overhead blink in silence. Somewhere in the woods, an owl calls once. Then nothing. You've been quiet long enough. You return inside and crouch near Alice. I'm going to try, you whisper. She doesn't look surprised. Alone? I know that barn. Helped fix the roof last year. There's a back door. She considers this. If you're caught, it'll run fast. She sighs, but nods. Tom watches you from his blanket, eyes wide and solemn. You grab a lantern, a length of rope, and the smallest hammer you own, just in case the latch needs persuasion. The village is silent as you approach. Here's your quirky tidbit. Despite the romantic image of tight village communities, Tudor settlements were often places of deep suspicion. Neighbors watched neighbors. Gossip moved faster than fire. But even then, many households had their secrets, whether it was an extra child hidden during census time, a hen kept unreported, or a runaway hidden in the loft. You pass the mill, the church, the green where maypoles once stood and now lay buried in snow. The barn sits behind the steward's hall, shadowed, solid, cold. You circle to the rear. The latch is old, splintered. You tug gently, then harder. The rope slips. You reposition it, heart thumping in your throat. Finally, it gives. Inside, it smells like damp straw and despair. A single lamp burns low. You see him wheel-chained by one ankle to a beam. His head is down. He's whispering something over and over. Bess, you say. He jerks upright, fear wide in his eyes. But when he sees your face, the panic fades, replaced by something worse hope. She's okay, you whisper. The baby too. You reach for the chain. It's not locked, just hooked. Cruel, but not clever. You unfasten it, wrap your cloak around him, and help him to his feet. He limps badly, but he moves. The walk back takes forever. Every crack of a twig sounds like an alarm. You freeze at the slightest breeze. But no dogs bark, no torches flare, just your breath and his and the distant hiss of wind over snow. Back at the cottage, Alice opens the door before you knock. She helps Will inside, wraps him in blankets. Bess runs to him, hugging him fiercely. They don't speak. They don't need to. You close the door, bar it, pull the curtain shut. Inside, it's warm, safe. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue just how complicit rural villagers were in Tudor-era justice. Were they passive victims of aristocratic cruelty? Or did they actively participate betraying neighbors, enforcing the rules, upholding the social ladder? Some records show communities shielding fugitives and sharing stolen food. Others suggest harsh local enforcement, even among the poor. The truth, as always, is somewhere in between. Tom brings Will a cup of broth. He drinks slowly, like it hurts to swallow. You sit beside the hearth, hands out to the flame. Alice joins you, silent. You realize what we've done, she says softly. You nod. I do. She doesn't scold you, doesn't warn you, just takes your hand and squeezes it once. The baby stirs. Bess hums a lullaby, soft and off-key. Will is already asleep, mouth slightly open, breath shallow. You listen to it all, the fire crackling, the wind against the walls, the quiet rhythm of survival. There's no plan for tomorrow, no clever speech, no assurance that the steward won't come knocking. But for now, no one is cold. No one is locked in a barn. No one is alone. And that is something. You wake up just before dawn, and for a rare, fleeting second, you forget everything. There's no steward, no fear, no baby asleep in your only warm bed. Just a quiet morning, the soft glow of embers, and the steady rhythm of 6 lungs rising and falling in a room barely big enough for 3. But reality seeps in fast. Your joints protest as you sit up. The fire is almost out. Alice is curled tightly under a patchwork quilt, one arm flung over a snoring Tom. Will and Bess are still sleeping, their backs pressed together like 2 bricks in a chimney. The baby little Nan, they've started calling Harris, nestled into a pile of linen scraps, wrapped like a cabbage roll, and just as motionless. You tiptoe across the creaky floorboards, toss another log onto the coals, and ease open the shutters. Outside, the frost has returned with a vengeance. The trees sparkle in the pale blue light, and the fields beyond are ghostly and still. The entire world looks frozen mid-breath. Inside, the cottage smells like ashes and wool and warm people. It smells like safety, but not for long. You know this can't hold. Not with 6 mouths and only 3 blankets. Not with the steward's men patrolling the road, their eyes sharp from boredom, and their pay low enough to make petty cruelty feel like a bonus. Alice stirs behind you. Tea? She mumbles, eyes still shut. Water, you reply, handing her the kettle. She sits up slowly, rubbing one eye. We'll need to decide soon. You nod. I was thinking the same. And here comes the question you've both been dreading. What next? Because sure, you broke Will out of a locked barn. You risked everything to save him. And maybe, just maybe, your neighbors will keep quiet. But the steward? He never forgets. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, justice wasn't just about what law was broken. It was about who you were when you broke it. A poor boy stealing food, public whipping or hanging, a nobleman's son caught poaching deer. Maybe a stern letter from the bishop. The social ladder didn't just exist, it was carved into stone, oiled daily, and guarded by men with dogs. Bess wakes next, already alert despite the exhaustion in her eyes. She checks on the baby and slips outside without a word, likely to fetch kindling. Will stirs soon after, coughing into his sleeve, then gritting his teeth through the pain in his leg as he limps to the stool. You hand him a piece of dried bread. Still better than the steward's grain mash, he mutters. You can't argue. The stew from the night before stretched thinner than soup, but somehow everyone managed to eat. Still, supplies are low. You'll need flour, root vegetables. Maybe eggs if any hens are laying in this weather. Alice kneads the last of the flour into dough. We've got maybe 2 days' worth, she says, not looking up. Unless someone gets generous. I'll visit Martha again, you offer. She might still have onions. She'll have questions. Then I'll lie better. She snorts. You're terrible at lying. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some Tudor villages, local widows were unofficial keepers of gossip, justice, and barter. Need a charm for childbirth? Ask the widow. Want to know who stole your pig? She already knows. They were half outcast, half oracle, and completely indispensable until they weren't. The line between wise woman and witch was thin and easily crossed. Tom volunteers to gather pine cones for the fire. You let him go, it gives him purpose, and the woods are safer than the roads right now. Mid-morning, Bess returns from the forest path, cheeks pink from cold. There's smoke rising by the mill, she says quietly, not from a chimney. Everyone freezes. Will's knuckles go white around his mug. You and Alice trade a glance. You both know what it means. The steward's riders are moving. They've started searching. He's not letting this go. That evening, the plan takes shape. I can lead them away, Will says, jaw tight. They'll be looking for me. No, Bess snaps. We're staying together. Alice, stirring a pot of barley soup, says, You'll die in the woods. Better me than all of you. You hold up a hand. Enough. There's silence. Then you speak, slowly. We need to hide you, somewhere no one looks, and we need the village to think you've gone. All of you. Will frowns. We can't disappear? No, you say, but we can become ghosts. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how often Tudor-era villagers actively aided fugitives. While court records show plenty of arrests, they also show unexplained gaps people who vanished between villages, children who reappeared with new names, women who lived for years under assumed identities. Were these cases of lax enforcement or widespread community resistance? No one's certain. You explain the plan. Bess, Will, and the baby will go deeper into the woods, to the old charcoal burner's hut. It's falling apart, but it's hidden and dry. You'll bring food every few days. Alice will spread the rumor that they fled south. Tom will tell anyone who asks that the baby was just a traveler passing through. It's risky, but it's all you've got. That night, under a half moon, you walk together into the forest. The air is so cold it burns your lungs. Will leans heavily on a walking stick. Bess cradles Nan in her shawl, whispering nonsense to keep her calm. When you reach the hut, it's worse than you remembered. The roof sags. The hearth is choked with leaves, but it's shelter. And it's far enough that the steward's men won't find it easily, especially if they're lazy, which you're counting on. Alice unpacks bread and blankets. It'll come again in 3 days, you whisper. Stay quiet. No smoke during the day. Will nods. Bess hugs you tightly, without a word. Then you return, alone, through the dark forest. Branches claw at your coat. The wind howls through the trees, but you feel strangely lighter, because they're alive, because they still have a chance. At the cottage, Tom is asleep, with a candle still burning beside him. Alice sits by the hearth, silent. You sit beside her. She leans her head on your shoulder. And for a moment, just a moment, it feels like the world might not be as cruel as it so often pretends to be. You wake to a knock. Not the sharp rap of a steward's boots. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor with rumors. Just a knock. 2 quick thuds. Familiar. Expected. You lie still for a moment, heart not racing, just listening. Another knock. A beat. Then a voice, low and clear. It's me. You rise and pad to the door, careful not to wake Tom, who's bundled in the chair by the hearth. Alice is already sitting up, pulling her shawl tighter. The fire's low, but still burning. And in the hush of pre-dawn, every sound seems louder. The latch clicks as you lift it. Will stands there, alone, hood low, hands red from cold. A small sack slung over his shoulder. He steps in, stamping his feet. No one followed? You ask. He shakes his head. Didn't use the main path. You nod, and Alice silently hands him a cup of warm water, maybe the closest thing to tea you have left. So what's wrong? She asks softly. Why risk coming back? Will sets the cup down. It's Bess. You freeze. The baby? She's all right, he says quickly. But Bess, she's not well. Coughing. Hot. Barely got up this morning. Your stomach drops. It's too soon for this. Too soon for sickness. You had barely begun to breathe. We need help, he continues. She's not going to last out there on roots and cold air. Alice is already pulling on her cloak. Elle, go with you. We'll bring her here. You glance at the window. The sky outside is turning that iron gray that promises snow. Not soon now. No, you say. We'll all go. We'll bring them back. Hide them here until the storm passes. Will hesitates. The steward. We'll take that risk later, you interrupt. Right now, we're not leaving her to die. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Tudor England, a common cold could kill you. Pneumonia, influenza, even untreated fevers often proved fatal. Antibiotics didn't exist, and most remedies relied on guesswork herbs, honey, bleeding, or prayers. If you were poor and sick, your best bet was survival by sheer luck. The snow starts just as you're crossing the field. Tiny flakes at first, then bigger, stickier ones that cling to your lashes and numb your nose. The trail is harder now, the forest unfamiliar under white. You and Will lead, with Alice close behind. Tom back at the cottage is warned to stay quiet no matter what. The old charcoal hut comes into view, and even with snow dusting the roof, you can tell something's wrong. There's no smoke, no movement. Inside, Bess lies curled near the hearth, pale and sweating. The baby sleeps, red-faced and warm in her bundle, unaware. Alice rushes to Bess, touches her forehead. She's burning. Bess opens one eye, tries to smile. You came. Of course we did, you say, crouching beside her. You think we'd let you freeze in here with a newborn? She laughs, just once, then coughs. It sounds deep, rattling. Alice is already working, pulling out cloths, mixing herbs from a pouch. She's whispering something an old rhyme or maybe a prayer. You don't interrupt. We need to move her, you say. Will hesitates. Can she make it? She has to. Together, you wrap her in everything you have: shawls, cloaks, even the baby's spare wrap. You carry her between you, slowly, step by step. The snow thickens. Wind whips through the trees like a warning. By the time you reach the cottage, your arms are shaking. Tom has the door open before you knock. He gasps when he sees Bess, but doesn't ask questions, just helps lay her near the hearth. The baby stirs. Alice takes her, bouncing gently. She's warm, she whispers. Thank God. You get to work. More water, more cloth. You build the fire so high it sings. For a moment, the cottage becomes a blur, steam rising, sweat on foreheads, the hiss of wet rags. You've never worked like this before. Never fought off death with only heat and herbs and sheer refusal. You don't know how long it lasts, but finally, Bess breathes easier. Her eyes close not from weakness, but from sleep. You sit back, breathless. Alice leans on your shoulder. Will slumps against the wall, eyes damp. Tom, trying to be helpful, offers the baby a carrot. She does not accept. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tudor households believed in all sorts of odd cures for fever-cutting onions and placing them under beds, tying red ribbons to wrists, or placing warm, urine-soaked cloths on the forehead. Yes, really. Did they work? Well, some swear by the onion trick, even today. Night falls fast, but no one dares sleep deeply. The storm outside pounds against the shutters. Snow has piled knee-high at the door. You're sealed in for now. That might be your greatest protection. The steward's men won't be patrolling tonight. Not in this weather. No one would be. Inside, the world is firelight and slow breathing. Bess stirs once or twice, but rests. The baby fusses, then settles against Alice's chest. Will has taken up your stool, one eye open, as if daring the wind to try anything. Tom builds a fort out of firewood. You don't stop him. That night, something shifts. You don't know if it's the storm, or the moment, or the strange alchemy of shared fear and exhausted hope. But you all feel it. Not safety. Not yet. But belonging. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Tudor rural homes were truly communal during times of crisis, or whether that's a romantic myth layered over harsher realities. Some records suggest villages turned inward during plagues and famine. Others hint at fierce loyalty, especially among the poor. Truth likely lived in the margins, where survival required both selfishness and sacrifice. You curl near the hearth, cloak pulled to your chin. Alice beside you, breathing steady. Will watches the fire, blinking slow. Bess sighs in her sleep. The baby lets out a tiny, startled snore. And just like that, the whole cottage smiles silently, softly. Outside, snow falls, like silence made visible. Inside, 6 hearts beat under one roof. Morning comes slowly, filtered through snow-packed windows and the pale, slushy light of winter. You don't remember falling asleep, only waking to the steady rhythm of breath and crackling logs. No alarms, no knocks, just warmth and the quiet miracle of stillness. Bess is still with you. She's propped against the wall now, pale but pink-cheeked, sipping a warm cup of something Alice brewed with honey, thyme, and stubbornness. Her eyes flutter open when you hand her a fresh cloth for her forehead, and this time, she really does smile. She's strong, Alice whispers, watching the baby gurgle on the blanket beside the hearth. That one will outlive us all. You smile and nod, eyes watering more than you'd like to admit. Will is at the window, keeping lookout. The storm is dying, but the snowdrifts have become walls. No tracks, no signs. The world is a blank page. Tom breaks the silence by announcing he's decided to name the baby Juniper, after the tree he once fell out of. Bess doesn't object. The day unfolds with gentle slowness. You patch a few holes in the thatch. Alice rewraps Bess's bandages. Tom sets about organizing a guard schedule, though his watch mainly consists of peeking through shutters and eating leftover bread. Everyone is exhausted, but no one complains. By mid-afternoon, Will pulls you aside. "I can't stay," he says, voice low. "The snow will melt, and they'll come asking again." You look him over. His jaw is firmer, his eyes clearer. The near-death weight has lifted. "You're stronger now." He nods. "Thanks to you." He asks for your old boots. You give them. He asks for a map Alice draws, one in charcoal on a scrap of parchment. You pack him salt, dried meat, a wool cap that's seen better days, and a folded note unsigned, just in case someone kind finds him. You walk him to the tree line. The snow is quieter here, muffled and deep. "You don't have to go alone," you say. "I know," Will replies, "but someone else needs this place more." He turns back once, and then he's gone, just another ghost in the white. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many people in Tudor England fled oppressive homes or villages in hopes of something better elsewhere. These masterless men, as they were sometimes called, were often treated with suspicion, but not always. Some were quietly taken in by religious houses, farmers, or even small families like yours. Kindness survived, even when systems failed. Back at the cottage, Tom is drawing maps of his own. Charting the kingdom, he announces, in case anyone else needs saving. Bess sleeps deeper now, the baby curled under her arm. Alice has found a piece of embroidery she had long forgotten. You help her sort thread, while the fire murmurs beside you. Outside, the snow begins to melt. Drip, drip, drip. Slow, soft water sounds, the first hint that the world is changing again. You take a walk that evening, alone, just around the edge of the field. The trees are quieter now, no longer looming. The sky is turning from gray to a delicate, glowing blue. When you return, there's Stu waiting. Juniper is chewing on a carrot stump. Alice has fallen asleep, with thread tangled in her fingers. Tom has drawn a mustache on the sleeping baby. You do not stop him. Here's your quirky tidbit. Tudor-era folk believed that babies born during storms were storm-blessed, stronger, luckier, and protected from evil spirits. Some families marked storm-born children with a ribbon tied at birth, which they were meant to carry forever as a charm. Juniper, it seems, will need a ribbon soon. As the day ends, you sit by the fire one last time. The cottage is quiet. Bess breathes softly, healed. Alice snores gently. Tom is inventing a lullaby on the lute, most of which is just humming and occasional outbursts of potato. Juniper gurgles along, off-key but sincere. And you? You close your eyes, letting the fire warm your toes, your cheeks, your heart. No one is safe forever. But tonight, everyone is here. Together. Warm. Alive. Here's your open scholarly debate. Historians still argue how much autonomy rural women truly had in Tudor England. Were they silent victims of patriarchy or resilient architects of their own survival? Accounts vary wildly depending on the recorder, but oral histories, letters, and stubborn, lived evidence suggest that many women weren't just surviving, they were resisting, shaping, and sheltering entire lives in the quiet corners no one bothered to document. And now, all that's left is this moment. The world hushed. The baby sighs. The fire lowers. The snow outside melts, drip by drip. And slowly, the night takes you. The firelight flickers softer now, casting warm shadows across the old wooden floor. Outside, the last of the snow has turned to a quiet slush-its rhythm, steady and soothing, like breath in the dark. Inside, all is still. The baby sleeps again, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of a worn blanket. Alice murmurs something in her dreams, a half-remembered tune or memory, fading like mist at dawn. Even Tom's lute has finally gone silent, resting at his side like a soldier after watch. You lean back. The air smells faintly of thyme, wool, and ash. The kind of scent that tells your body, softly, that it's safe now, that you can let go, that for tonight at least, the world can wait. Outside these walls, life will continue. Harshness, hunger, fear they'll come knocking again. But not now. Not here. Right now, all you need is breath, warmth, and sleep. Let your muscles soften. Let your thoughts quiet. Let the hush of snow and the steady tick of melting drops carry you further into stillness. You've earned this rest. You've earned this moment. And the cottage, tucked away in the winter woods, watches over you. A shelter in time. A pause between storms. A story that doesn't need to end just yet. So close your eyes, sink deeper into the quiet, and drift, drift, drift. End of story. Sweet dreams.